Now that leads us to another reason for pain and suffering, and it's this. And by the way, this world is just the way God planned it. Again, God doesn't make mistakes, and that's weird. You'll hear a lot of Christians say, oh no, God just allows it, and what a mess this is. I hate to say it or rock your boat. This world is exactly the way God wants it right now. Now, he's not picking on us individually. We can't really believe that, but he allows people to have a free will, and it wreaks havoc. But this is the world that he planned. And part of pain and suffering is to get our attention so we can search and we can find and seek him and find and make it to that eternity. There's another reason that's pretty bizarre, and it has to do with this. Is there a hell? A lot of people say, oh no, a loving God wouldn't have a hell. Well, yes, he would. The Bible's very clear, and we should trust the Bible because everything we've been able to verify so far, we can verify. And we trust the Bible. And Jesus spoke of it. There is a hell, but who is it prepared for? Before he made humans, God made other beings, angels, and a third of them fell and they rebelled. And there is a spiritual realm out there that I think if we really thought about it, it would probably terrify us. So I want to be on God's side and let him take care of things. But that's who hell was prepared for, is the devil and his angels. And quite honestly, there's a few of us that deep down, we're really happy that there's a hell. I want there to be a hell for people that have murdered others, for people that have butchered others, for the things, the atrocities that have been done to mankind. I'm glad. Maybe that makes me a bad person. I am glad there's a hell for those people to be tormented with. And I don't know what it's like in the spiritual realm when the Bible talks about a flame that never dies, or fire that never dies, the worm does not die, and there's screaming. I mean, it's a horrible, crazy place, gnashing of teeth. It's not a place we want to go to. But you know what? I'm sorry, it makes me a bad person. I'm glad some people are going to end up there. But I'll let God take care of that. But he says to us, he's not willing that anyone should perish, but that all of us should come to eternal life. And there's going to be murderers that turn their lives around at the 11th hour, and their hearts became right for God. They're going to be in heaven with us. They're forgiven. We're forgiven. And that's good. But here's another reason why I think there's pain and suffering. Will God sit back and watch some of you out there who haven't made a commitment for him yet? Will he be willing to watch you go into hell and spend eternity there? Well, let me ask you this. Does he watch little 3- and 4-year-old children on the other side of the globe die every day of starvation? And oh, by the way, that's a painful, horrible death. Does he sit there and watch little babies dying in their mother's arms every day? Yes, he does. One of the other reasons for pain and suffering, you guys, is for us to realize he's not messing around. This is real. I know I sound like a Southern Baptist right now, and I'm in hell and fire and brimstone. But you know what? Think about it. He's willing to do that. He's trying to get your attention. I will let you suffer for eternity if you don't accept what I did for you, because it was the most loving thing I could possibly do. By the way, one more added to that. It's like some of us blame God when we see things like, why would he let 20,000 children a day, every day, on average, 20,000 children under age 5 starve to death or die of a disease due to maybe bad drinking water or a mosquito bite, and we sit here and we blame God. Well, wait a second. We have a free will. In America alone, if each of us donated $20 a month to world relief agencies, we could knock that number down to almost nothing. So again, it doesn't make sense when we blame God for all the suffering on the planet, because we're more responsible for it than he is. So there's a lot of things that have to be dealt with in the realm of pain and suffering. And again, it's why this video is so important in my opinion. God understands our pain. He decided to come to earth and lay down his powers in the spiritual realm, lay down all that power he had, and God the Son, Jesus, became a man and lived for over 30 years and knew what it was like to be tempted and what it was like to suffer and die. And again, the example he gave while he was here, he got in the face of people that were promoting the wrong kind of religion and were off on their religious ideas. But how did he treat the people that nobody else loved? He treated them with dignity. He treated them with respect. In his life, and the Bible tells us this, he was full of truth and he was full of grace. And that's the balance we should strive for. We're going to fail every day, but we try. We try for truth and grace. That's how we follow and try to be Christ-like. Now, there's another reason for pain and suffering, and this we'll wrap up the video with this, and it's this notion. Try to define valor. Try to say what is valor, and what is valiant, and what is beautiful, and try to define valor without pain and suffering and evil. If we really think about it, what we recognize as some of our greatest human acts, and the acts that show us that we're capable of so much love, and that we're created in the image of a God who is also full of love and grace, it's oftentimes, you guys, the valor that we see in the face of death, in the face of suffering, in the face of evil. We see it when we see policemen and firefighters that are climbing up the stairs in the World Trade Centers when everybody else is going down. We see that kind of valor, that kind of love, that kind of goodness. And it comes through pain and suffering. And we see those buildings go down, and it makes us think, and it makes us ponder, and it makes us need to honor those lives and that goodness and that valor that is part of the human condition. And it's the good part of the human condition. It's that part of God that is in us. It's that valor that we see in 1989 in Tiananmen Square, when that young man comes out of nowhere and he steps in front of those tanks and he says, "No, you will have to run me over before you will continue." And people around the globe see that video, which made it out of that communist country to be shown to the rest of the world. And people behind the Iron Curtain say, "Look at what that one person did." And we can stand up against our oppressors and be willing to sacrifice our own lives, which they did. And then they changed the world too. And it's about a young girl named Teresa who looks to see what's happening in her country, where the elderly are laid in a ditch to die, and how people are just ignored, and orphans are left to rot. And she says, "No, I'll give my life. I'll sacrifice my entire life to care for these people." And Mother Teresa set the standard, and so many people came to join her. There's so many reasons for pain and suffering. And one of it has to do with that valor that we see. And then there's the greatest act of valor of all time, and it's God himself. And he comes down, he loves us so much. And no matter how much we're hurting and how much people have done to us, and people have done horrible things, I know they have, and we feel inadequate, or we feel guilty, or we feel shame. And God's whole point is to stir us up, and then to get us to think how loving he is, and how much he cares for us, and how this life will be short and will be in eternity. And oh, by the way, don't check out on us. Suicide is not an option. I know there's people that consider it all the time. I was considering suicide at one point in my past. I can somewhat relate to what other people feel when they're so depressed and they're so despondent. But we get to a point where we have to realize eternity with God starts in this life. You cannot have it any other way. It only starts here. When we recognize we fall short, when we recognize what he did, when we accept what he did, and we say we will follow you, it's at that point that a transformation happens. It's when our ticket is punched, and it's at that point that we enter eternity. Heaven is in our hearts. God comes into our hearts and dwells. Our route to eternity can only start here. You can't commit suicide and say, "I want to get to that next life with him." If you don't begin that eternity now in this life, you don't get to go to it then, so you have work to do. You might be hurting so bad, but you got to pick yourself up, call somebody, do something, distract yourself, stay in the game, find the rules, watch these videos, turn to God because he's so good. And the greatest act of valor was displayed by him. He came down, he knew what was going to have to happen. He knew the night before he went to the cross, he was so upset that he was sweating blood when he was praying to God the Father, because he was dependent on God the Father just like we are in this life. He was hurting. He knew they were going to arrest him. They yanked out his beard. They ripped out the flesh on his back, and he knew that he'd have to carry his cross up the hill. He knew what would happen. He was almost dead at that point. They stretched out his arms. They nailed it to the cross. He bled there and he died. And he couldn't lift himself up anymore. And he gave his last breath. And he said, "This is for you. It's for you. I want you with me in eternity. This is what this whole plan was about. Think it through. Reason it through. There's a universe that speaks to his love and his goodness and his patience for just a short life that will only happen for 120 years or less. And then he says, trust me. Verify it through the word, the holy book that I give you. You can trust me. He says, I've gone to prepare a place for you. And behold, I stand at the door and knock. I'm knocking at your heart. If you open up and let me in, he will come in. He'll restore the years lost to the locusts, which means he's going to help you to get through some of the hurt that you've experienced in this life. And this life will continue to be painful, but there's a joy in it. There's a purpose. There's a goodness we can have. And in the end, when it's all done, before we leave this place and go on, we live with a tremendous purpose. And we live, if we're ready to renew our minds, with a love with no strings attached. It's like there's no ledger. Yeah, we're going to fail and we're going to do good. We're going to sin and we're going to do good. There is no ledger. Once he accepts us and we accept him, we're on our way. And so no ledger, no strings attached, no guilt, no shame, just love. And the last idea is this, that then how do we go from here? Well, we realize that once all that other stuff is out of the way, the guilt, the shame, and everything else, it really comes down to this. When we realize there's an eternity, love the Lord our God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love our neighbors as we love ourselves. So what remains? Just like Corinthians 13 says, it's faith, it's hope, and it's love. But the greatest of these